Hey guys, tonight we slip into sandals, step into the shimmering heat of the 14th century West African sun, and wander through a world that feels like a mirage brought to life. The air is heavy with the smell of river silt and fried millet cakes. Somewhere nearby, a griot hums a tune so slow you can nap between verses. You're in the early Mali Empire, long before guidebooks, long before Instagram, and brace yourself long before air conditioning. You probably won't survive this, at least not without several jugs of water and a portable shade tree dot, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always fun to see how far this sleepy little caravan travels. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing on the southern edge of the Sahara, where the land opens up into a network of rivers, scrublands, and dusty savanna paths. The Niger River curves through this world like a shimmering silver snake, feeding fields of rice and millet and ferrying canoes piled high with goods. Somewhere upriver, fishermen unload their nets, tossing small fry to the waiting birds, while women rinse calabashes in the shallows, chatting about whose goats have been particularly unruly this week. This is the Mali Empire in its dawn still. Young, still stretching its limbs after the rise and fall of the Ghana Empire before it. Gold is the secret heartbeat here. Not the kind you dig with giant machines, but fine dust, gleaming flakes sifted from riverbeds and traded in little leather pouches. It is so abundant that, in certain markets, people measure it out with spoons as casually as you might ladle sugar. The markets themselves are a swirl of voices and scents. Salt slabs stacked like stone walls, amber beads catching the light, and blocks of indigo cloth dyed so deep they make the desert sun look pale. Historians still argue whether this trade network was already global in reach at this early stage, or if it was more of a regional web slowly pulling in faraway threads. Either way, the merchants here carry news as valuable as their wares, whispers about distant wars, strange spices from the east, and the ever-shifting politics of who controls the trade routes. You meander through a riverside trading hub where Tuareg camel drivers in indigo robes bargain with Sunni traders for salt. The camels stand by with their long lashes and expressions of eternal boredom, perhaps dreaming of cooler nights. In one corner, a leather worker rubs oil into a saddlebag, making it gleam like warm honey. You pass by the blacksmith's forge, the rhythmic clang of hammer on iron oddly soothing in its steadiness. Beyond the towns, Mali stretches into grasslands dotted with acacia trees and villages clustered around wells. In the distance, baobab trees stand like watchful elders, their thick trunks holding centuries of rainwater and memory. You skirt past one such tree, where a group of elders are deep in conversation, perhaps deciding which young man will take the role of chief's messenger, or debating whether the last harvest shortfall was the fault of too much sun, too little rain, or simply lazy millet. A few days' walk away, caravans form like rivers of movement across the sand. Hundreds of camels sway under loads of salt, textiles, and of course, gold. The traders wrap their heads against the sun, the cloth serving as both shield and portable shade. At night, they huddle around fires, sipping tea so strong it could wake a stone, swapping tales of markets where people eat fish so big you could build a hut out of their bones. Stories you suspect are slightly exaggerated, but are too pleasant to interrupt. The empire is a patchwork of cultures: Mandinka farmers, Fulani herders, Tuareg nomads, each contributing their own language, customs, and skills to this growing tapestry. Some settlements are small, a ring of huts around a grain store. Others are bustling towns with mosques whose mud walls are smoothed anew after every rain. You drift through one such town in the evening when the call to prayer floats over the rooftops, blending with the smell of spiced stew cooking slowly over coals. This is the stage onto which the story of Mansa Musa will unfold, though right now he is not yet born. The political landscape is shaped by trade wealth, Islamic scholarship creeping in from the north, and the careful balancing act of ruling over a land so large you could walk for weeks without seeing its edge. Somewhere, a future dynasty is just an idea in a storyteller's mind, waiting to be told by a fire. But even in these early days, Mali has a reputation. Foreign merchants speak of a land where gold flows like water, where justice is swift but fair, and where travelers can find safety under the Mansa's protection. Whether every detail is true or not is beside the point. This is how legends take root, and once they do, they're harder to uproot than Abio Biabita as the sun dips low. You follow a dusty path toward a riverside rest stop. The air cools slightly, and the first stars wink awake overhead. A woman passes you carrying a clay pot balanced effortlessly on her head, her bare feet making no sound on the earth. Somewhere nearby, a drummer begins a slow, steady beat, each note like a footstep into the deepening night. You feel the weight of the day's heat slipping away, replaced by the slow hum of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. It is in this setting, a land rich in trade, culture, and quiet ambition, that the seeds of Mansa Musa's story are sown. The gold is here. The trade is here. The roads are here. All that's missing is the man who will one day walk them with a caravan so large the world will talk about it for centuries. But for now, you rest by the riverbank, lulled by the water's murmur, the taste of sweet tea on your tongue, and the sense that something extraordinary is just beyond the horizon. You wake to the smell of wood smoke curling into the cool dawn air, the first faint blush of sunrise brushing the Niger's surface with pale gold. Somewhere, a rooster crows far too enthusiastically for this hour. In the gentle half-light, you wander toward a royal compound, not one of towering marble, but a sprawling enclosure of sun-baked mud walls, timber gates, and open courtyards where the day's first chores have begun. Inside, the soundscape is a mix of sweeping brooms, bleating goats, and the low hum of a lullaby sung to a child who clearly has no intention of waking yet. Here, within the safety of these walls, a boy named Musa has been born into the Keita dynasty. His arrival doesn't shake the world, no comet streaks overhead, no sandstorm pauses mid-gust to mark the moment, but his life will one day thread itself through the fate of Mali like gold stitched into a cloak. Historians still argue whether Musa's birth fell late in the 13th century or early in the 14th, and whether he was directly in line for the throne or several steps removed. But as you stand quietly in the yard, watching an elderly nurse carry him past in a soft cloth sling, those details feel distant and unimportant. What matters here is the sense of belonging. He is a child of the Mansa's household, cradled by both kinship and obligation. The compound smells of millet porridge, smoke from cooking fires, and the faint tang of drying leather. Men sit in a shaded corner repairing saddles, while women knead dough on low tables, their hands moving in hypnotic rhythm. Musa's early world is a tapestry of textures, the scratch of woven mats under his tiny fingers, the warm press of his mother's embrace, the clink of brass bangles as she gestures in conversation. Life here is measured by the sun and the seasons. The royal household rises early, not out of necessity, others do the heavy labor, but because ruling families are expected to be alert, visible, and engaged. The mornings are filled with council discussions, the afternoons with lessons and ceremonies, and the evenings with quiet meals and storytelling under the stars. A Gray arrives in the courtyard, his voice carrying tales of Sundiata Keita, the founder of the Mali Empire. He tells of prophecies, battles, and the binding of disparate peoples into one realm. Musa, still a toddler, doesn't grasp the politics or the strategy, but he listens to the sound of the words, the rise and fall of the griot's tone, the way each pause feels like the inhale before a leap. Perhaps even now, some part of him begins to understand that power is as much about the stories told as it is about the gold held out as Musa grows. You see him toddle after older boys in the courtyard, trying to mimic the way they toss small leather balls or balance sticks on their palms. He learns the family's prayers early, his small voice joining the chorus in the morning, his forehead pressing gently into a mat woven from river reeds. Sometimes he is allowed to wander beyond the gates with his minders, where the wider city of Miani unfolds before him, markets filled with the chatter of traders, smithies glowing like small suns, and the steady drumbeat of life in a capital that hums with wealth. One afternoon, you follow Musa to the edge of the river, where fishermen are hauling in nets heavy with silverfish. A boy offers him one, its scales flashing in the light, and Musa laughs a pure, delighted sound. His life is sheltered, yes, but the pulse of Mala's economy is everywhere, in the salted fish traded upriver, in the dyed cloth brought from the north, in the gold dust passing from palm to palm. Quirky traditions slip into his upbringing. On certain feast days, the household's young boys are dressed in miniature versions of royal regalia, not to parade for the people, but as a quiet charm to teach them the weight of leadership early. Musa wears a tiny tunic with golden thread and promptly falls asleep on a mat, the embroidery creasing into his cheek. Leadership, it seems, will have to wait in the evenings. The stars bloom over the compound, vast and uncountable. You lie on your back beside the boy, the earth still warm from the day, and trace the slow arc of the constellations. A storyteller points to one cluster and spins a tale of a hunter chasing an antelope across the sky. Musa asks how long the chase will last. Until the end of the world, the man replies. Musa frowns, perhaps wondering if he'll still be awake for the ending. His family keeps him close, but news still drifts in from the wider empire tailies of distant towns paying tribute, of caravans delayed by sandstorms, of a rival chieftain trying and failing to undercut Mali's gold trade. These snippets are the background music to his youth, the constant reminder that the kingdom's wealth is both a treasure and a responsibility. Sometimes, when the moon is high, a soft desert wind slips over the compound walls, carrying with it the scent of distant acacias and the faint jingle of camel bells. You imagine Musa lying in his sleeping space, the sounds weaving into dreams of faraway roads and places he has yet to see. He is still just a boy, not yet the Mansa, not yet the man whose journey will reshape economies and astonish cities. But here, in the quiet heartbeat of the royal compound, his life is already tied to the rhythm of Mali itself, a rhythm that will one day thunder across deserts. The mornings come earlier now, or maybe you're simply more aware of them. Musa is older, his legs longer, his gaze sharper. He wakes before the sun sometimes, stepping into the cool half-light of the courtyard to join the first prayer of the day. His voice has lost the tentative squeak of childhood, now it flows with a slow confidence, shaped by repetition, the words rolling like small pebbles smoothed in a river. The royal household has begun to weave him into its daily duties. His tutors, lean and patient men in flowing robes, lead him to a shaded corner where mats are laid out. The scent of ink and parchment drifts through the air, ink made from soot, gum arabic, and water, thick and black enough to shine. A Quran rests on a low wooden stand, its script curling like vines across the page. Musa leans in, tracing the letters with his eyes while the tutor's voice guides him through each verse. Historians still argue whether Musa was a prodigy in his studies or simply diligent in the study, measured way that royal children are trained. Either way, he learns quickly, his memory grasping both scripture and the subtle lessons tucked within it: morality, governance, the rhythm of discipline. But lessons aren't confined to the page. Some afternoons he is taken to the camel pens, outside the compound. The air there smells of hay, leather, and the warm musk of the animals themselves. Musa learns how to approach a camel without startling it, how to check the straps on a loaded pack, and, most importantly, how to sit without sliding off when the beast rises like a slow-moving earthquake. He laughs when one camel turns its head and huffs directly in his face, its breath smelling faintly of chewed dates dot in the palace courtyards. Politics hum beneath the surface like the drone of cicadas in the hot season. Musa begins to see that power isn't just about orders given, it's about who stands where, who speaks first, and whose silence is the most dangerous. He watches his elders listen to visiting envoys, their expressions as unreadable as carved masks. He notices which servants glide closest to the royal council meetings and which ones mysteriously know the news before anyone else. Quirky customs slip in as well. On certain market days, young nobles are sent to shadow traders in the bazaar, not to buy, but to learn the art of negotiation. Musa trails a seasoned merchant through rows of spice sellers, his nose full of pepper and cinnamon. The merchant argues over a bundle of cloth, raising an eyebrow so theatrically you wonder if the whole thing is a performance for Musa's benefit. By the time they leave, Musa has learned 3 different ways to refuse a price without actually saying no. Outside the capital, the empire continues its slow expansion. Caravans leave for the salt mines of Chigaza, their loads of gold dust hidden in bamboo tubes or sewn into the hems of robes. Musa hears of these journeys from returning guards, how the desert can swallow you in silence, how the heat shimmers so fiercely it makes men walk toward mirages. One guard tells him about a night so clear you could see the Milky Way reflected in the dunes, a sky doubled and infinite sometimes. Musa's duties involve small but symbolic acts, presenting water to an honored guest, carrying a message between council members, or standing beside his elders during public prayers. These moments are brief, but each one plants a seed of awareness that his life is not entirely his own, that the eyes of others will often measure him before he speaks. And then there are the quieter lessons. In the still hours after sunset, Musa sits with the griots, those keepers of memory who carry Mali's history in their minds. They tell him of Sundiata's great battles, yes, but also the small, almost forgotten choices that shaped the empire, the trade agreements sealed with a single handshake, the river crossing timed just before the rains. One griot insists that leadership is mostly about timing. Another says it's about patience. Musa listens to both, perhaps wondering if the truth is somewhere in between. One evening, he's invited to join a hunting party, not for the thrill of the chase, but to understand the coordination it requires. You follow him into the bush, the air thick with the scent of crushed grass. The hunters move silently, signaling with small hand gestures. When they finally flush a hare from the brush, there's no wild shouting, only a swift throw of the net and a murmured prayer of thanks. Back at the compound, the hare becomes part of the evening stew. Its flavor shared among many dot, it's clear now that Musa is being prepared for something larger, though no one says it aloud. His days are a blend of scripture and saddle work, counsel, shadows, and marketplace walks. Even his games with other boys have a certain discipline to them, mock debates where they argue over imaginary borders, races where the winner is the one who paces himself, not the one who sprints. On one particularly hot afternoon, Musa slips away from his tutors to sit under a baobab at the compound's edge. The tree's bark is cool against his back, and its massive branches spread above like a canopy of still air. You watch him there, a boy on the edge of manhood, half listening to the distant sounds of traders, half dreaming of roads he has yet to travel. Somewhere in his mind, perhaps, the pieces are starting to arrange themselves. Scripture, trade, animals, politics, all threads in the same cloth. The sun dips low, and the compound glows in its evening colors, reds, golds, and deep shadows. Pooling in corners, Musa rises, dusts himself off, and walks back through the gates. You follow, knowing he is stepping into the next stage of his life, each lesson a quiet weight in the pockets of his future. You glide into the trade winds of West Africa, where footsteps are as important as oars, and where wealth isn't just counted, it's carried, stacked, sniffed, and sometimes licked. You drift beside a file of camels leaving the Niger Valley, their padded feet whispering over the sand like brushes over parchment. The lead driver adjusts his indigo veil, glances at the sky, and gives a low click with his tongue. The caravan responds like a long, sleepy serpent. You fall in among them, the same way you once fell in with that camel who breath chewed dates into your face. Old friends reunited by the open road. The routes themselves are elastic. Some coil north toward the salt mines of Tagaza, others angle northeast to Taketa for copper, and still others hook west to forest edge markets where cola nuts pile up in heaps like reddish-brown pebbles. You hear the clink of leather pouches packed with gold dust, the shush of woven baskets filled with grain, and the muted thunk of salt slabs being tested for soundness. A merchant taps one block with a knife. The salt sings with a dull clarity, like a xylophone that retired early to focus on its meditation practice stop by noon. The sun is a white coin overhead, and the caravan slows to a steady, careful pace. The camels carry towering loads, salt, cloth, glass beads, brass, and the news of a dozen towns. The men carry ledgers in their heads, easy smiles, and at least 5 versions of every rumor. You adopt the caravan rhythm walk, sip, rest, repeat like a lullaby written by the Sahara itself. One mainstream fact settles in your mind, like dust on a sandal. Salt from Tagaza is Mali's white gold. The mines, gnawed out of crusted flats, produce slabs so large they're strapped across camelbacks in pairs. Tagaza is so saturated with salt that people build walls and even roofs from it, then smear them with mud to blunt the desert's edge. The thought of living in a house that dissolves if you season your dinner too enthusiastically makes you smile. Still, these slabs travel south to the Niger and beyond, traded for grain, cloth, and of course gold. You drift through a riverside market when the caravan reaches a bend in the Niger. Canoes nose the bank like patient fish. Piles of millet and rice stand beside jars of shea butter and baskets of smoked fish. A woman folds indigo cloth with quick, precise flicks. A boy rubs his hands with a paste of crushed cola to stay alert. You sample a sliver of dried fish and chase it with sweet tea so strong it could convince a fence post to sit upright. Remember the tea that could wake a stone, you think? Yes, this is its talkative cousin. You wander past a stall where gold dust is measured out with tiny scoops. The dust glows softly in the shade like evening sunlight trapped in a bowl. It's kept carefully, sometimes sealed in quills, sometimes in small leather purses, sometimes in gourds lined with oil to keep it from drifting away on a careless breath. You hold your own breath just in case. The last thing you want is to sneeze yourself into bankruptcy. Historians still argue whether government officials supervised every weighing in the capital or whether local markets kept their own more relaxed systems. But everyone agrees that Mali's gold fields, especially in Bambuk and Bur, are the empire's deep heartbeat. The gossip you gather moves faster than camels. A trader from the desert whispers that prices in Cairo are shifting after a wealthy pilgrim passed through with an unhelpfully generous purse. Another swears that Taketa's copper mines are producing ingots shaped like small loaves, easy to stack and harder to miscount. You nod along, tucking each tidbit away as if stacking blankets for a cold night. When the talk drifts to poetry, yes, even traders love a verse. You learn that elegant praise songs can be as valuable as gold if sung for the right patron. Consider it the medieval version of influencer marketing with fewer ring lights and more lutes. You cross paths with Tauric guides, their veils deep blue, their eyes patient and amused. They teach you the sure signs of a well-packed camel and the subtler art of reading wind lines on sand. They also teach you the caravan joke that never gets old. A camel is a ship of the desert, which explains the seasickness. You laugh politely, then admit this way really does make you feel like you're rolling on gentle waves at dusk. The sky bruises purple, and small fires bloom across the camp like fireflies that decided to settle down. You sit with merchants who unwrap salted slabs and shave off edges to flavor the stew. Salt is more than taste. It's health, preservation, and in many places, the closest thing to a paycheck. Some guards prefer to be paid partly in salt, which feels practical until the rainy season threatens to turn your salary into a well-seasoned puddle. A quirky tidbit slips into the conversation. In some regions beyond Mali, people carve little salt figurines as travel charms. One merchant carries a tiny salt camel, which he swears has protected him from at least 2 bad bargains and one alarming sandstorm. You decide not to lick it. Morning brings the soft bark of orders. You set out again, passing waypoints, lonely acacias, low ridges, the dry mouths of wadis. The trade network is as much memory as map. You learn how a caravan leader stores directions and proverbs. Turn your shadow's length after the second tamarind, or walk until the wind smells like water. The slightest wrong turn can mean an extra day's march. The right breeze can save a life. Historians still argue whether certain trans-Saharan crossings were seasonal or continuous year-round, but everyone agrees that timing is everything. The desert is a partner if respected and an unblinking judge if ignored. When you reach a larger hub, Gao or Timbuktu, depending on which bend of the river your feet prefer, you find warehouses of packed clay, mosques with smooth mud walls and wooden beams jutting like careful eyelashes, and courtyards where scholars debate law beneath woven shade mats. The city hums with languages: Songhai, Mandinka, Tamashek, Arabic, and the universal tongue of bargaining. You drift through a scriptorium where a copyist polishes an inked page until it gleams like river water in late afternoon. One mainstream fact lands softly: manuscripts here will one day become famous, a beacon of learning in the Sahel, drawing students along the same roads that draw salt and gold in a quiet corner. A griot tells you about silent trade, a practice where parties leave goods on a riverbank and depart, then return later to find fair exchanges made without a word. The idea is romance wrapped in logistics, mystery, trust, and a dash of theater. Historians still argue whether silent trade truly occurred as described, or whether it's a fond exaggeration stitched into the region's storytelling. You imagine it anyway: the hush of reeds, the soft slap of water, the delicate thrill of finding exactly what you hoped for beneath a folded cloth. Your own steps grow measured. You have learned to move at caravan speed, to count daylight by the depth of shadows, to savor water like it's a poem. You've learned that a market is a chorus: salt's clean brightness, gold's quiet glow, cloth's deep blues, and dates' sticky sweetness. You've learned that wealth here is not a tower, but a network threads crossing river, desert, and city until they weave a fabric tight enough to carry a kingdom. When night leans in, you lie on your mat and listen for camel bells, each note a delicate reassurance. Somewhere nearby, someone tells a joke about a trader who tried to haggle with the moon. The punchline is that the moon never changes its price. You smile, roll onto your side, and let the road's long memory cradle you. The roots are drawn, the rhythm steady, the market's ready. All we need now is a ruler whose travels will briefly turn commerce into legend, someone whose generosity will ripple from here to the Mediterranean like a stone dropped into a still pool. You breathe in the faint scent of salt and smoke and drift toward sleep, already halfway to the next city. The capital is buzzing today in a way you can feel through the soles of your feet. The air is thick with that special kind of anticipation, half curiosity, half unease, that means something in the royal court is shifting. You stroll the corridors of the compound, noticing how servants move a little quicker, how griots rehearse their praise lines under their breath, and how guards keep glancing at the gates as though expecting the horizon itself to walk in. Somewhere inside the council chamber, a decision has been made. Word slips out in quiet bursts. The reigning Mansa, Abu Bakr II, has departed on a voyage, some say to explore the Western Sea, others say to vanish into a story no one will ever finish. Historians still argue whether his expedition truly reached unknown lands or simply disappeared into the vast Atlantic. But everyone agrees on one thing: he left a vacancy that needed filling, and so, in the kind of twist that only power and fate can choreograph, Musa, once a boy chasing leather balls in the courtyard, now a capable young man, has been chosen to step into the role. Not as regent or caretaker, but as Mansa, the great king of Mali. The announcement isn't a shout, it's a ripple. First the advisors, then the palace staff, then the market stalls just outside the gates. By the time the news reaches the porters on the far side of town, it's already grown a few embellishments. Some say a hawk circled the compound 3 times at the exact moment the council decided. Others swear the Niger flowed more brightly. That morning, you hear a child ask his mother if Musa will give everyone free gold she smiles in. That way adults do when they don't want to crush a fantasy too quickly. The succession ceremony is not the kind of glittering, crown polishing affair you might imagine. Instead, it's deliberate, weighty, full of gestures that matter more than sparkle. Musa appears in richly dyed robes, the deep red of dried hibiscus trimmed in gold thread. On his head, a turban wound with care. At his side, the ceremonial sort of state. Around him, nobles and elders gather in a half circle, their eyes measuring, weighing, nodding. You stand just behind the crowd as the grides begin. Their voices layer over one another, chanting Musa's lineage, his deeds, his promises. The air smells faintly of sandalwood smoke curling from censers, and the ground beneath your feet hums with the steady beat of drums. A group of women begin a low ululation, rising and falling like the tide. A quirky tradition slips into the proceedings. A bowl of water is placed before the new Mansa, into which he sprinkles gold dust. The gesture is meant to promise that his rain will enrich and refresh the land, though you imagine a few small fish in the Niger might be even more delighted than the citizens. Musa tips the gold in with slow precision, the flakes swirling like tiny suns before sinking. When the formalities end, the crowd erupts in that restrained but unmistakable way. People call blessings, griots, improvise rhymes, and a man with a drum launches into a rhythm that demands at least a few celebratory dance steps. Musa doesn't dance, but his eyes glint half pride, half calculation. He knows this is not the finish line. It's the starting whistle dot. The next morning, you find him walking the palace corridors with his advisors. They speak of tribute from distant towns, the repair of key roads, the need to fortify the northern borders against raiders. Musa listens more than he talks, though now and then he asks a pointed question that makes the older men exchange small, approving looks. Historians still argue whether his early caution was shrewd strategy or simply the natural hesitancy of a new ruler. But you can feel the deliberation in his steps. Outside the palace, the city seems to lean in toward the news. Merchants in the market start naming their prices, Mansa Musa prices. which could mean higher or lower depending on the direction of the morning's gossip. A potter paints his wares with small golden dots in honor of the new Mansa's fortune. You pass a group of children playing palace court, one boy on a stool giving grand, sweeping orders to imaginary guards. At night, the compound feels different. The guards stand a little straighter, the shadows seem a little quieter, as though the air itself is waiting to see what this new chapter will bring. Musa sits with a small circle of trusted companions under the open sky. They speak of loyalty, of vision, of the empire's place between the great deserts and the green forests beyond. Somewhere in the conversation, you catch the faintest hint of a plan forming, something involving lone roads, distant cities, and a kind of journey that will outshine even his coronation. The stars wheel slowly overhead, and you're reminded of those nights when Musa was a boy, lying in the courtyard listening to the griots. Now, he carries those stories not as tales, but as responsibilities. The drums of the day have faded, but the rhythm of the empire beats on, steady as a camel's stride across the sand. The first weeks of Musa's reign settle into a pattern that feels less like a victory lap and more like tightening the strings of a massive gold-embroidered drum. The air in the palace is busy but not frantic, a kind of measured hum, as if everyone knows the beat must be kept steady or the whole rhythm will stumble. You walk beside him through echoing corridors where the scent of freshly plastered walls mingles with incense smoke. The floor cool underfoot, even in midday heat. Musa begins his mornings with council meetings. They're not the fiery debates you might imagine, more like slow-moving chess games played with words. Advisors lean in, exchanging nods or raised brows, every pause calculated. They discuss border fortifications in the north, the upkeep of river crossings, and a particularly stubborn stretch of road that seems to collapse every rainy season. Historians still argue whether his focus in these early months leaned more toward consolidating political stability or preparing for expansion. But from your vantage point, it feels like he's weaving both aims together into the same cloth. Join him on a walk through the outskirts of Niani, the capital. It's not just for ceremony. Musa likes to see the work with his own eyes. The road crews are out, barebacked in the sun, tamping down fresh layers of clay. Beside them, donkeys pull carts of timber for bridge repairs. Musa stops to speak with the foreman, asking when the road will be ready for the caravans that bring in salt and grain. The man promises before the next new moon, though you detect the kind of optimism that could survive only in front of a king. Markets are a daily pulse. Musa moves through them without the heavy entourage you might expect, flanked instead by a handful of guards and an interpreter. He stops at a stall selling copper trinkets, turning a small coiled bracelet over in his hands. The merchant bows and begins to recite the bracelet's history, partly truth, partly performance. Musa smiles, and instead of buying it, he commissions a set for the palace guards. A clever gesture, a small luxury for the men who guard his life, and a reminder to the market that their king invests in their work. Quirky customs dot these tours. On one visit to a river dock, Musa pauses to watch fishermen haul in their nets. Tradition says the Mansa should take the first fish caught that day as a symbol of fortune, but Musa waves the offer toward a nearby orphanage instead. The gesture draws murmurs of approval, though you suspect at least one courtier is already drafting a poem about it. In the evenings, Musa holds smaller, quieter councils, private discussions with scholars, traders, and elders from outlying regions. You sit through one where a Songhai merchant describes a surge in river trade, and another, a Fulani elder, warns of drought in grazing lands. Musa listens intently, occasionally stroking his chin, his eyes flicking to the firelight as if the flames themselves are tracing routes on some invisible map in his head. Historians still argue whether his openness to voices beyond the royal Court was a genuine political philosophy or a shrewd tactic to gather intelligence. Either way, you see its effect. People leave these meetings feeling seen, and news flows to Musa's ears like tributaries feeding the Niger. One afternoon, you find him in the palace gardens, walking the sandy paths between neem and baobab trees. He pauses under a canopy of broad leaves to speak with an architect from the north, a man who has designed mosques with walls so smooth the rains can't find a purchase. Musa is asking questions about foundations, water channels, and the durability of clay. The architect answers in patient detail, and you realize Musa isn't just thinking about buildings for beauty's sake. He's already picturing a Mali whose skyline will be recognized across continents. There's a warmth to his leadership, but also a steeliness. When news arrives that a distant province has delayed its tribute, Musa dispatches envoys with a mix of gifts and firm reminders. The hand that gives gold can also take it away, he says quietly to one advisor, and you feel the weight behind the words. Sometimes his day ends not in council, but in the open courtyards where griots perform. You watch as one griot, draped in a robe the color of storm clouds, tells a tale of a ruler who kept his kingdom safe by always knowing the price of salt and the strength of the wind. Musa listens, nods once, and later sends a small bag of gold dust to the man's family. A gentle reward, but also a subtle signal. Stories matter here. The court itself begins to adapt to him. Nobles who once kept a careful distance now lean. And during conversations, messengers from beyond Mali arrive more frequently, their gifts heavier, their greetings longer. A traveler from Ifriqiya brings a bolt of silk so fine it passes through a ring. Musa thanks him and has it stored not for display, but perhaps for some future moment when a gesture will need to be made. And yet, in the quiet after the torches are extinguished, you sometimes see Musa walking alone along the palace walls. He looks outward beyond the city, beyond the gold-laden routes, toward the invisible edges of the world. You suspect he's already thinking about a journey so vast and deliberate that it will carry his name far beyond Mali's borders. But for now, the drumbeat of daily rule holds steady, repairs made, borders guarded, alliances nurtured. The empire breathes under his watch, waiting for the day it will march with him toward a horizon no one in Nanami has yet seen. The morning air is cooler than usual, as if the Niger itself is holding its breath. In the palace courtyard, servants carry bundles of cloth, jars of water, and baskets of dates toward the gates. The rhythm is purposeful, not frantic. This is not an evacuation. This is preparation. You catch sight of Musa, already dressed in travel robes, conferring with a small group of advisors. His voice is calm, but you can feel the energy rippling underneath. The pilgrimage is about to begin. This is no small outing. The Hajj to Mecca is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, a journey of devotion and discipline. For an ordinary pilgrim, it's a spiritual commitment that demands months of travel. For the ruler of Mali, it's also a statement part faith, part diplomacy, part theater on a scale few cities on earth have ever seen. Historians still argue whether Musa planned every detail himself or delegated much of the logistics, but either way, it's clear this caravan is being assembled to leave an impression that will echo for centuries. You follow him to the outer square, where the procession has begun to form. At the front, scouts on horseback wait, their mounts pawing at the dust. Behind them, camel handlers adjust saddles padded with folded blankets, each animal stocked with goods, sacks of grain, bolts of cloth, and chests are heavy with gold dust. The size of the caravan borders on the surreal. 100 camels would already be impressive. This one will grow to thousands, with men on foot, women carrying baskets, and musicians who will play in the evenings when the desert falls quiet. Musa has ordered so much gold to be carried that even the accountants look slightly dazed. A quirky detail emerges as you watch. The herald staffs are capped with polished copper in the shape of tiny crescent moons. They gleam in the morning light, bobbing gently as the heralds walk. An old courtier explains it's both a symbol of faith and a practical beacon if the caravan strings out too far. The glint of the staff can signal where the front lies. You imagine that in the blinding glare of the Sahara, it's as much an art as a science to follow the right. Shined-up Musa moves along the line, speaking to the captains of each unit. He asks about water supplies, about the readiness of the cooks, about the health of the camels. When a handler admits one animal has been stubborn, Musa suggests pairing it with a younger camel to remind it that life still has surprises. The man laughs. You suspect the advice applies as much to people as to camels. By midday, the palace gates open. Drummers start a slow beat, joined by the deep hum of horns. People from the city crowd along the road to watch, their voices blending into a rolling murmur of blessings and farewells. Children point at the camels piled high with goods, whispering guesses about what's inside. Somewhere in the line, a griot sings verses about the journey ahead, his voice threading through the air like a silk ribbon. The road out of Niani is wide enough for the first few ranks to move side by side. The dust rises quickly, turning the edges of robes the color of toasted bread. You walk with them, feeling the shift from the bustle of the capital to the open rhythm of the countryside. Villages along the way come out to greet the caravan. Musa sometimes stops to pray with the locals, leaving behind small gifts, often salt or cloth. Sometimes gold, each gesture binding another thread between ruler and people. One evening, the caravan halts at a riverside clearing. Cooks set up their pots, the smell of spice stew drifting through the camp. Musicians gather near Musa's tent, their chorus strings weaving soft, lilting patterns into the night air. Mansa himself walks among the campfires, asking after the day's travel, sharing dates, listening to the laughter of his men. He seems lighter here, the formal stiffness of court replaced by something more open. Though the quiet watchfulness in his eyes never fades, historians still debate the exact number of people who traveled with Musa. Some sources claim 60,000, others far fewer, but even at a modest estimate, it is a moving city. Every stop requires coordination: where to graze the animals, how to distribute water, when to rise and when to rest. You watch the captains move through their routines, calling out instructions, marking off sections of the camp like neighborhoods. On the 12th day, you pass into drier land. The air loses its lush river scent, trading it for the crisp dryness of the Sahel. The horizon stretches wider, and you can feel the pull of the desert ahead. Musa rides near the front now, a line of banners rippling behind him, gold-threaded designs on deep blue cloth, catching the wind like sails aimed toward an unseen shore. At one rest stop, a trader from the north approaches with news. Markets in the oases ahead have already begun preparing for the caravan's arrival. Word of Musa's wealth travels faster than the camels themselves. Some merchants, the trader says, have doubled their stock. Others have already raised their prices, knowing the gold-laden pilgrims will not be turned away. Musa smiles faintly, as if he expected nothing less. When the caravan resumes, you fall into step beside a group of younger guards. They swap stories about the journey's end, what Mecca will look like, how many days the prayers will last, which spices they'll bring back. One jokes that if Musa spends enough gold, they'll have to measure its impact on the wind itself. You laugh, but privately wonder if that's not so far from the truth. By the time the stars rise again, the road has settled into a steady rhythm. Fires glow against the dark, and the murmured prayers of the pilgrims drift upward into the vast, salt-strewn sky. The Mansa sits outside his tent, his gaze fixed on the darkness ahead. Somewhere beyond it lies the desert, and beyond that, Cairo, Mecca, and the kind of fame no amount of gold could buy, though, as you know, Musa is about to try. The desert does not greet you with a roar. It greets you with silence, so complete you can hear your own heartbeat in your ears. The green of the Sahel fades behind you, and ahead lies a canvas of sand and stone that seems to have been painted in the color of heat itself. The air feels thinner, sharper, and the sun hangs in the sky like a brass gong waiting to be struck. The caravan adjusts. Camels are roped into tighter lines. Water skins are checked twice before each departure, and scouts ride further ahead to find the best ground for the next halt. Musa rides under a broad white turban now, its folds shielding his face from the glare. His robes are lighter, but still rich at cream weave embroidered with a narrow band of gold thread that catches the light in small, sharp flashes. Historians still argue about the exact route across the Sahara. Some say Musa followed the western trail through Walata. Others insist he cut further east toward Tuat. Whichever it was, you can feel the discipline in every step. Days start before dawn, when the sand is still cool and the stars are just beginning to fade. The camel's long shadows stretch toward the horizon, broken only by the occasional rise of a low dune. Mid-morning, the heat presses down like a heavy hand. Mirages shimmer on the horizon pools of blue that dissolve into nothing when you blink. A handler chuckles and calls them desert lies, a reminder that the Sahara has its own sense of humor. You wrap a cloth over your mouth to keep from inhaling the fine, powdery dust that rises every step. It tastes faintly metallic, like air that's been cooked for hours. The caravan keeps a steady pace, stopping at known wells and oases. At one, the water is so clear it seems unreal. Date palms ring the pool, their fronds whispering in the hot wind. Musa dismounts to greet the local caretaker, offering salt and cloth in exchange for access. There's a tradition here at the Mansa. Drinks first, not out of vanity, but to test the safety of the water. He takes a measured sip, nods, and steps aside so the rest can drink. You notice the smaller rituals of desert travel. Guards wet their turbans before riding on, letting the slow evaporation cool their heads. Camels are fed dates at night, the sugar giving them an extra push for the next day's march. One quirky detail catches your eye. Some handlers tie tiny bells around their lead camels' necks, the soft chime helping the rest follow in low-light conditions. At night, those bells sound like distant wind chimes, oddly comforting against the dark dots. Sometimes the caravan passes other travelers, smaller groups moving in the opposite direction, their camels laden with salt slabs or bundles of ostrich feathers. There's an unspoken etiquette here, a pause, a greeting, a brief exchange of news. One Tuareg rider tells Musa that a sandstorm swept across the route ahead 3 days ago, burying several way markers. Musa thanks him, then quietly instructs his scouts to watch the wind more closely. Days stretch into a slow rhythm. You wake to the pale blue of early light, walk through the gold of midday, and rest under skies so full of stars they seem to drip toward the horizon. The desert smells faintly of warm stone and dry wind, a scent that clings to every blanket and robe. Meals are simple flatbread, dates, dried meat, but somehow tastes richer after the long hours of travel. One afternoon, you crest a low ridge and see a cluster of black tents ahead, flapping in the wind, a nomad encampment. Musa is greeted with cautious respect. The nomads know his name, and word of the gold he carries has clearly traveled ahead. They offer fresh goat's milk and shade in exchange for gifts, and the Manso leaves them with a pouch of gold dust and a small copper dagger. As you walk away, you hear one boy whisper to another that they've just met the richest man in the world. Historians still debate whether Musa's caravan suffered significant hardship in the Sahara or passed through relatively unscathed thanks to careful planning. The truth, you suspect, lies somewhere in between. The desert tests everyone, even kings. You see it in the tired lines around Musa's eyes at night, and in the way his captains count the water skins like treasurers guarding coins. But the desert also has its gifts. On the 14th evening, the caravan stops at a high plateau where the wind drops away and the horizon opens like a book. You sit beside Musa as the sun sinks, spilling orange and crimson over the sand. For a moment, the entire world seems still, just the sound of camels chewing, the faint clink of armor, and the slow breath of the Sahara cooling into night dawn as darkness folds in. The caravan lights its fires in a careful crescent around the camp. Musicians pluck at chorus, their notes soft and rolling. Musa walks the perimeter, speaking with guards, thanking the cooks, asking after the health of the animals. Even here, at the heart of a journey that could have swallowed him, he carries himself like a man who belongs to both the road and the thrown dot by the time you lie down on your mat. The sand feels almost soft, its warmth seeping into your bones. Overhead, the stars crowd close enough to touch, and you think about how each step through this vast, quiet place is carrying you closer to the cities where the world will finally see what Mansa Musa has brought with him. The first thing you notice about Cairo is the sound and endless, rolling hum that's part market cry, part clatter of hooves, part the steady shuffle of sandals on stone. After weeks of the desert's vast hush, the noise is almost dizzying. You pass through the gates with the caravan, the dust of the Sahara still clinging to your clothes, and feel the city breathe you in. The streets are a swirl of color and movement. Merchants call out in Arabic, Nubian, and tongues you don't even recognize. Spices heap in pyramids, saffron glowing like embers, cinnamon curling in tight, fragrant rolls. Brass lamps catch the sunlight and scatter it in bright shards across. Shaded alleys. Somewhere nearby, a water seller clinks brass cups together, advertising relief from the heat. Historians still argue over exactly how much gold Musa brought into Cairo. Some claim it was so much that the city's economy was bent under its weight for more than a decade, prices twisting upward like vines on a trellis. Others say the stories grew taller with each retelling, embroidered by merchants who couldn't resist adding a zero or two. But standing here, watching the chests of gold dust carried off the camels like sacks of grain, you suspect the truth is already plenty extravagant. Musa rides at the center of the procession, his horse draped in fine textiles, his own robes shimmering in the sunlight. The people crowd to see him, craning their necks for a glimpse of the Golden King from the west. Cairo has hosted pilgrims for centuries, but nothing on this scale, nothing with such deliberate grandeur. It's not arrogance. It's theater. The kind that makes an entire city lean forward to watch Dot in the markets. His spending begins almost immediately. Gold changes hands for silk, for fine Arabian horses, for rare manuscripts bound in leather and studded with metalwork. Artisans who would normally haggle for hours find themselves speechless when Musa offers them prices well above their asking. A silversmith actually drops his tools when the Mansa buys his entire week's work in a single gesture. Quirky little moments dot the days here. One afternoon, Musa steps into a perfumer's stall and emerges with a small vial of rose water, which he sprinkles on the hands of children who've been following the caravan through the streets. On another, he commissions an entire batch of copper bowls, not for the palace, but to be given out at the next rest stop to anyone in need of a cooking pot. The Cairo Gossip Network, which is as efficient as any merchant caravan, explodes. With these stories, you notice, though, that his generosity is strategic. The gifts flow toward people who matter: local officials, prominent scholars, influential traders, each one leaving the interaction a little more favorably inclined toward Mali. It's diplomacy wrapped in gold leaf, and it works. Evenings in Cairo are a different kind of busy. Musa attends gatherings in courtyards lit by oil lamps, where scholars debate law and poets recite verses so smooth they seem to pour like honey. He listens more than he speaks, occasionally asking a question that makes the conversation tilt in an entirely new direction. At one such gathering, a scholar mentions a famed architect from Andalusia. Musa's eyes sharpen slightly, and you can see a seed being planted, one that will later bloom in Timbuktu. Historians still debate whether Musa understood the full economic ripple his generosity would cause here. Gold, after all, is not just a shiny token. It's the skeleton of trade itself. Flood a market with it, and prices sway like reeds in the wind. Some say he was caught off guard. Others argue it was a calculated move to display Mali's wealth so vividly that no one could doubt its power. Either way, Cairo will remember this visit for generations. One afternoon, you walk with him through a quieter quarter of the city. The air smells of baking bread, and children chase each other between stalls. Musa pauses to watch a scribe at work, the man's reed pen scratching across parchment with a sound like soft rain. He buys the manuscript on the spot, though it's unfinished, and asks the scribe to complete it and send it south. A book, he says, is the only cargo that grows heavier in the mind. When the caravan finally prepares to leave Cairo, the mood in the city is almost wistful. Merchants line the roads, some hoping for one last sale, others simply wanting to see the procession depart. Musa leaves gifts behind, more gold, more textiles, even a few of the camels themselves. Laden with supplies for the poor dot as you ride out, you glance back at the skyline of minarets and domes shimmering in the afternoon heat. The air is thick with the scent of spices and dust, the hum of the city fading behind you. Ahead lies the Red Sea route, and beyond that Mecca. The desert will rise again between you and home. But for now, the road bends toward the heart of the pilgrimage, the place where Musa's faith, politics, and legend will all converge. The gold has been spent, the stories have been sown, and Cairo's markets will be adjusting their prices for years. But in Musa's mind, this is only an interlude. The true purpose of his journey lies ahead, in a city that calls to every pilgrim in the Islamic world. The air shifts as you near Mecca, not in temperature, but in tone. The noise of merchants and caravan chatter softens into something steadier, almost like the hum of a great heart beating beneath the sand. Pilgrims from every direction begin to merge onto the same roads, their clothes dusty from weeks of travel, their eyes bright with the anticipation of a destination so layered with meaning that even kings walk humbly here. You travel alongside. Musa, as the landscape changes, desert. Still, but punctuated by more frequent wells, small clusters of palms, and towns where the call to prayer echoes off stone walls and domed roofs. The caravan slows to match the pace of others, the great river of humanity moving together toward the same spiritual ocean. When the Kaaba's black-draped cube first comes into view, it's not with a trumpet blast or drumbeat, it's a quiet reveal, the way the horizon simply opens, and there it is. Musa dismounts, removing his sandals and walking the last stretch with the rest of the pilgrims. His gold-threaded robe is still fine, but simpler than Cairo's dazzling displays. Here, wealth is measured in devotion. Historians still argue whether Musa stayed in Mecca for weeks or months, but the moments you witness stretch long and rich. He circles the Kaaba with the other pilgrims, the sound of thousands of footsteps like a soft rain on stone. His hands brush the cool marble of the Masjid al-Haram, and for once there is no audience, only the private rhythm of prayer. The days here are marked by ritual. Musa joins in the prayers at dawn and sunset, the air cool against his skin in the early hours, warm and scented with incense as the day closes. He visits scholars in shaded courtyards, sitting cross-legged unwoven. Mats while tea is poured. Discussions range from theology to trade law, from the interpretation of a verse to the logistics of moving grain across deserts. One afternoon, a scholar from Yemen presents Musa with a rare Quran, its pages etched in gold leaf so thin you could mistake it for sunlight. Musa accepts it with a bow and places it beside him, as carefully as if it were a sleeping child. Later, you see him reading from it alone, lips moving silently, the lines of travel and rules smoothed from his brow for the first time in weeks. Quirky details slip into this sacred time. One evening, while the courtyard lanterns sway gently in the breeze, Musa listens to a story about a merchant who claimed to have traded salt for pearls the size of pigeon eggs. The storyteller swears it's true. The listeners exchange amused glances. Musa chuckles softly but asks for the man's name anyway. You never know which tall tailies contain a thread worth pulling. The pilgrimage isn't just about devotion, it's also about connection. Musa uses his time to meet leaders from across the Islamic world, merchants from India, emissaries from Egypt, scholars from Damascus. Each conversation is a subtle weaving of threads trade agreements hinted at, scholarly exchanges promised, diplomatic courtesies extended. You realize that the Hajj is the perfect stage for such weaving, because every thread begins with shared faith. Historians still debate whether Musa's meeting was certain. Architects and builders happened here or later along his return journey. But in this moment, you can see his attention sharpen whenever someone mentions a city renowned for its learning or its mosques. His mind, it seems, can hold the stillness of prayer and the movement of plans at the same time. When the major rites of the pilgrimage are complete, there's a visible lightness in him. His steps are less deliberate, his laughter easier. On the final night in Mecca, the camp is filled with a gentle contentment, the kind that comes from having done something both difficult and meaningful. Pilgrims share food and stories. Some sing softly, their voices carrying into the warm darkness. Musa sits a little apart, watching the flicker of lanterns against the black of the Kaaba. You can almost hear the thoughts turning in his mind, of gold or glory, but of the way this journey has stitched Mali into the fabric of the wider world. And perhaps, too, of how to carry that connection home, to turn what he's seen and learned into something lasting. As the caravan prepares to leave, you take one last look at the sacred city. The air smells faintly of smoke and roses. The streets are quieter now, the press of bodies easing as pilgrims begin their long dispersal. Musa mounts his horse again, the reins resting lightly in his hands. The road ahead is no less long than the one you've just traveled, but it feels different, fuller, as though each step will be accompanied by the memory of marble under bare feet and the low murmur of prayers in the night. The pilgrimage is complete, but the journey, both literal and in the life of the Mansa, is far from over. There are gifts to bring back, alliances to nurture, and waiting somewhere beyond the desert, a city called Timbuktu that will soon be shaped by the things Musa has gathered here. The road away from Mecca feels different, not in direction, but in weight. The caravan that once moved with the restless energy of anticipation now travels with the quiet, full-bellied pace of those carrying more than goods, alongside the silk and spices, the manuscripts and fine ceramics. There's something invisible tucked into every saddlebag. Knowledge. Musa rides near the center, his horse draped in embroidered cloth, the color of desert dusk. He looks more at ease now, the long ritual of the pilgrimage having sanded away some of the tension from his shoulders. Yet you can see his mind turning. His conversations with scholars and architects in Mecca have planted seeds, and now, as the caravan begins its long journey west, he starts arranging in his thoughts how those seeds will be sown in Mali. Historians still argue about the exact list of treasures he brought back. Some emphasize the gold and trade goods. Others the human capital, architects, engineers, teachers, and calligraphers. You can see both in motion here. Near the front, a small group of learned men from Cairo and Mecca ride together, speaking in low voices about building techniques and library catalogs. In another cluster, craftsmen from the Levant discuss the patterns of their home mosques, tracing invisible lines in the air with their hands dot at one stop in a Red Sea port town. Musa inspects the loading of rare goods onto pack animals, glazed ceramics wrapped in straw, scrolls sealed in leather tubes, glass lamps shaped like blooming flowers. But more than the objects, he takes care to secure the people scribes, legal scholars, mathematicians whose work will make these treasures live beyond their beauty. Quirky moments bloom even in this practical stage of the journey. In one bustling market, Musa purchases a large quantity of sesame oil, only to give most of it away to a group of travelers from distant Ethiopia, explaining with a smile that oil is lighter to carry in gratitude than in jars. The recipients, astonished, bless him loudly enough for the sound to follow the caravan down the road. The caravan moves northwest now, winding toward the Nile. The days are long but punctuated by short, vivid encounters. A caravan of Yemeni traders, laden with incense, a Nubian musician who plays an instrument that sounds like water running over smooth stones, a group of students bound for the madrasas of Fez, their reed pens tucked behind their ears like soldiers carrying swords. One evening, in the shade of an acacia, Musa shares tea with a master mason from Andalusia. The man draws in the sand with a stick, outlining a mosque with high walls, arched windows, and a minaret like a needle of sun. Musa studies it closely, asking about the way light moves through the building at dawn. A mosque, the mason says, should feel like the first, breath after waking. You tuck that line away, already imagining the courtyards of Timbuktu warmed by such a design. Historians still debate whether the most famous buildings of Mali, like the Djingueber Mosque, were conceived entirely during this journey, or if Musa's vision evolved over time. But watching him now, engaged, questioning, even sketching in the sand alongside the mason, it's hard not to believe that the blueprint for Mali's golden age is already taking shape. The journey westward carries its own challenges. The desert must be crossed again, and the wealth of the caravan now makes it an even more tempting target for raiders. Musa increases the number of scouts, sends riders ahead to negotiate safe passage, and ensures that the caravan never moves without a full accounting of its people and goods. At night, fires are set in a wide circle, casting a ring of light around the camp, and the guard silhouettes move steadily against the glow, but there's also a sense of quiet momentum. Each day brings the caravan closer to home, and with it the thought of what will be done when they arrive. Musa's talks with his advisors now focus less on the road and more on what awaits beyond it: how to house the scholars, where to build the new mosques, how to establish centers of learning that will draw students from across the Islamic world. One afternoon, while the caravan rests near a shallow well, a small group of children approaches, drawn by the sight of so many camels. Musa dismounts to greet them, offering dates and a few coins. One boy asks if the Mansa's gold is heavier than the salt their fathers carry. Musa laughs and says, "Only if you think gold feeds you better than salt." It's a simple exchange, but you see in it the same blend of humility and perspective that has carried him from Miani to Mecca and Baghdad as the caravan crests a rise at sunset. The horizon glows in bands of orange and violet. The air smells faintly of wood smoke, perhaps from some distant village. Musa pauses to look west toward Mali, his eyes narrowing slightly against the fading light. In that moment, you can almost see the outlines of Timbuktu's future, its library stacked with manuscripts, its markets rich with goods, its skyline punctuated by minarets that catch the first light of dawn. The desert still stretches between here and home, but the path is no longer just a road. It's a bridge, carrying the wealth of worlds into one man's vision. And with each mile, the hum of that vision grows louder. You can smell Timbuktu before you see it, a mingling of dust, wood smoke, and the faint, dry sweetness of sun-warmed mud walls. After weeks on the road, the caravan's pace quickens slightly, the camels shifting into that familiar, patient rhythm they use when they sense they're nearing rest. The city rises from the Sahel like a mirage made permanent. Low, sand-colored buildings that seem grown from the earth, narrow lanes shaded by woven awnings, and the distant outline of minarets catching the afternoon light. Musa doesn't ride straight to the palace. Instead, he turns toward an open square near the heart of the city, a decision you quickly understand when the crowd begins to gather. Scholars, merchants, and children swarm in from every direction, their voices a bright, layered music. The returning Mansa is not just a ruler. He's a story walking into the city, and everyone wants to be in the first chapter. The days that follow are a blur of activity, but not the chaotic kind. Musa's plans, long imagined on the road, begin to unroll with the patience of a careful scribe. At the top of his list, building. The Andalusian mason from the pilgrimage becomes a familiar figure in the streets, his hands sketching in the air as he explains foundations and the interplay of shade and light. Musa walks the plots himself, inspecting the ground, speaking to local builders, and imagining the skyline decades into the future. Historians still argue whether the famous Jingerbur Mosque was begun immediately upon Musa's return or a short while later, but you see the energy already crackling here. The chosen site is cleared, bricks of sun-dried mud are molded and stacked, and wooden scaffolds begin to climb skyward. Musa orders that the mosque should not only serve as a place of worship, but as a beacon for travelers and scholars alike. It's minaret, a guidepost visible for miles across the flat land dot in the quieter hours. Another transformation takes root, the libraries. Musa gathers the manuscripts he's brought from Cairo and Mecca, placing them in the care of trusted scholars. They unfurl the pages carefully, the smell of ink and leather filling the room. Some are religious texts, others scientific treatises. Poetry, legal manuals, histories, each one a seed for the gardens of learning Musa envisions. He begins to commission copies, sending scribes to work in shaded courtyards where the scratch of their reed pens blends with the rustle of palm leaves. Quirky detail emerges in the building process. To keep the wet clay bricks from cracking too quickly in the sun, workers mix in chopped straw and on one particularly hot day crushed baobab fruit pulp. One laborer insists the pulp makes the bricks taste sweeter to termites, which is not exactly the reassurance you'd expect from a builder, but everyone laughs and keeps working. Markets feel the ripple almost immediately. The influx of architects, artisans, and scholars creates new demand, better housing, finer textiles, more varied food. Musa sets aside gold for improving the main market street, widening it so caravans can pass without tangling. He commissions shade structures to protect both goods and merchants from the midday glare. Soon, spices from the east sit beside Malian salt slabs and gold jewelry, while bolts of imported cloth hang like colorful waterfalls from the beams. Historians still debate whether Timbuktu's reputation as a global center of learning began in Musa's lifetime or solidified in the decades after, but the foundations are undeniably laid here. Visiting scholars are given stipends, encouraged to teach in open courtyards or beneath the mosque's arches. Students gather, some from nearby towns, others from far beyond Mali's borders, their questions spilling into the warm evening air. One afternoon, you follow Musa into a half-finished library. The air inside is cool and dim, the walls smelling faintly of wet clay. A single beam of sunlight falls on a stack of manuscripts, their leather covers catching the light. Musa runs his hand over the top one and says quietly, "Gold is only wealth when it feeds the mind." You've heard him speak of treasure before, but never with this tone here. It's almost a prayer. Quirky traditions begin to develop around the construction sites. Children compete to carry small loads of water to the brickmakers, rewarded with sweet dates. Local poets visit in the evenings, reciting verses about the buildings taking shape, sometimes comparing the new mosque's walls to the protective arms of the Niger itself. Even the masons get into the habit, scratching tiny marks into bricks. Before their set personal signatures that will be hidden but enduring dot as the city takes on this new energy, Musa still makes time for the rituals of governance. Disputes over trade are settled in the market square, tribute from distant provinces is received in the palace courtyard, and envoys from other kingdoms are greeted with gifts and offers of alliance. But the physical shape of Timbuktu, the skyline, lifting, the libraries filling, becomes the living emblem of his reign. By the end of the season, the outlines of the great mosque are visible from the road. Pilgrims and traders approaching the city can see the rising minaret and know they are entering a place touched by both wealth and wisdom. Standing on the high scaffold one evening, Musa looks out over the city as the sun slips low, the roofs glowing amber in the last light. You realize that for him, this view is not just the end of a project, it's the beginning of a legacy. The Mansa's pilgrimage may be over, but here in Timbuktu, its echoes are just starting to resonate. Gold may have bought the bricks, but it's the ideas, the teachers, and the books that will make these walls sing for centuries. The rhythm of Timbuktu has shifted. You can feel it in the way the market wakes earlier, in the hum of the courtyards where scribes bend over parchment, and the quieter dignity with which traders enter the palace gates. Musa's city is no longer just a waypoint on the trade routes. It's becoming a destination. You walk with him through the palace one warm morning, the air carrying the scent of tamarind stew from the kitchens. He moves easily among his advisors now, a man entirely at home in his role. His robe is a soft, deep indigo today, the kind that leaves a faint trace of dye on the skin if you brush it with your hand. Beside him, a court official reads aloud a list of disputes awaiting judgment, a caravan delayed by flooding, a disagreement over the quality of a copper shipment, a quarrel between two families about whose goats are eating whose millet, the throne. Room is not a gilded cage. It's an open space shaded by carved wooden beams where air and light move freely. Petitioners stand in a semicircle waiting to speak. Musa listens without interrupting, occasionally nodding or leaning forward. When he rules, it's with a mix of firmness and poetry, quoting a verse of the Quran here, a proverb there. For the copper dispute, he instructs that the shipment be tested by 3 independent smiths, their verdict binding on both sides. For the goat problem, he proposes building a shared enclosure and splitting the upkeep costs, a solution that makes both families nod. Though one man mutters about goats never respecting fences, historians still argue whether Musa's style of justice was uniquely his or simply a reflection of Malayan tradition. But in review, his ability to balance law with empathy is striking. No one leaves his court entirely empty-handed, if not with the outcome they wanted, then at least with the feeling they've been heard. Daily court life is not all disputes. Musa entertains foreign envoys beneath the palace awnings, serving them sweet tea and plates of grilled fish from the Niger. Gifts are exchanged: textiles, books, carved ivory, and in one case, a live parrot that seems to have memorized exactly one sentence: "The gold is ready." The bird's timing is impeccable, and its repetition becomes a running joke in the court. Quirky customs thread through the day. At midday, the court musicians play a slow, steady rhythm while petitions are heard, not loud enough to distract, but enough to keep the atmosphere from growing tense. On certain Fridays, Musa insists that the court adjourn early so that he can walk to the mosque through the market, greeting people along the way. It's a calculated humility, but it works. Traders beam when he stops to ask about their goods, and children follow him like a drifting comet. Afternoons often bring smaller gatherings in shaded courtyards, where scholars and poets join the Mansa for conversation. A visiting astronomer from Fez demonstrates a brass astrolabe, using it to measure the angle of the sun. Musa watches intently, asking how such knowledge might help his caravans cross the desert more safely. Later, a poet recites a new verse about the great mosque's rising minaret, likening it to a finger pointing the faithful toward heaven and travelers toward home. The palace kitchens hum constantly, preparing meals for guests and staff alike. You wander through once, catching the smell of roasting lamb and the hiss of oil as plantains are fried. The cooks joke that Musa's appetite is not for food, but for stories. He's been known to linger at the kitchens just to hear the latest gossip from the market, which the cooks collect like seasoned merchants. Historians still debate how much of Musa's attention was on day-to-day governance versus long-term legacy building. Watching him, you see both. He might spend the morning hearing about a boundary dispute between villages and the afternoon reviewing plans for a new irrigation system. He's as comfortable discussing camel trade routes as he is the placement of windows in a library. Evenings are gentler. The court gathers under the open sky, oil lamps flickering. Musicians play the kora and balafon, the notes mingling with the distant sound of the Niger lapping its banks. Musa sometimes joins in the singing, his voice low but steady. On other nights, he asks the griots to tell stories, not just of Sundiata or the old kings, but of the ordinary people whose lives knit the empire together. One night, as the air cools, Musa walks the palace garden paths with a trusted advisor. They talk of the scholars arriving from far-off lands, the trade and manuscripts beginning to flourish, the children now learning to read in the mosque shadow. A court, Musa says, is only as strong as the city around it. He pauses, glancing toward the silhouette of Timbuktu's rising skyline. And a city is only as strong as its stories. The days blend into a steady cadence: justice in the morning, diplomacy in the afternoon, learning in the evening. Timbuktu's heart beats to this rhythm now, and Musa is both its drummer and its listener. The years roll forward like the slow, steady Niger, and you can see the way time has begun to draw softer lines around Musa's eyes. His stride is still purposeful, his voice still clear, but there's a weight in his movements now, not just the gold-threaded robes, but the accumulation of decisions, alliances, and responsibilities that only grow heavier with age. Timbuktu, however, is thriving. The Jingerbur Mosque is long finished, its smooth, sun-warmed walls a landmark for traders approaching from the desert. The libraries are fuller now, their manuscripts carefully wrapped against dust, the shelves echoing with the scratch of reed pens. Markets are more crowded than ever. Merchants from Morocco, Egypt, and even further afield arrive with salt, textiles, spices, and gossip. Musa still makes his rounds, but less often on foot. He rides through the market streets on a white horse, the crowd parting like a tide before him. Children wave. Older merchants bow slightly and call blessings. His presence is both reassurance and reminder. The Mansa still watches. Historians still argue about the precise size of Mali's empire at this point, whether Musa's borders reached their widest under his reign, or whether that expansion was already slowing. From where you stand, the territory feels vast enough to stretch thought itself. Messages from distant provinces can take weeks to arrive, and each one is a small slice of life at the far edges of his rule. A governor requesting aid after a poor harvest, a caravan leader reporting bandit trouble near a border oasis, an envoy bearing tribute from a kingdom whose name is barely known in Nani. Quirky moments still pierce the formality. At one council meeting, An elderly courtier presents Musa with a carved walking stick for when the palace steps grow taller. Musa laughs and immediately uses it as a pointer on a trade map, tracing the river routes while the court chuckles. Another day, he insists on personally inspecting a shipment of figs from the north, only to eat half of them before the meeting even begins. There's a reflective quality to his days now. You see him spending longer in conversation with scholars, asking about histories of other empires, how they rose, how they declined. Sometimes he listens quietly to a griot's retelling of his own pilgrimage, saying nothing for long stretches, as though weighing which parts will still be remembered a century from now. One afternoon, you find him in the gardens with the Andalusian mason, now older himself. They walk slowly among the neem trees, speaking of building repairs and the way sun and rain shape clay over the years. Musa asks whether the mosque will stand for generations. The mason nods, if the hands that care. For it are steady. Musa seems to take the answer as much for the city as for the building. Historians still debate whether the slight decline in his later travels was due to age or a deliberate choice to focus inward. He no longer leads caravans beyond Mali's heartland, but his envoys and merchants still carry his influence far afield. Gold from Mali continues to flow into the Mediterranean economy, and the name of Mansa Musa is still spoken with awe in Cairo and Mecca. Court life remains lively, though. It now contains an undercurrent of succession planning. Musa begins to involve his heirs more directly in governance, summoning them to council, sending them on inspection tours, watching how they handle disputes. He corrects gently but firmly, using proverbs like tools to shape their thinking. A river can carry you far, he tells one, but you must still choose the bank where you land. Quirky traditions persist. The market still holds a Mansa's Day, once a season, when traders decorate their stalls with gold-colored cloth and school children recite poems about the city's greatness. Musa attends when he can, smiling at the lines about a ruler, whose gold is as heavy as his wisdom, and pretending not to notice the vendors using the holiday to nudge their prices up. Evenings are quieter now. He spends them in the mosque's shaded courtyards, in the palace gardens, or in a library room, lit by a single oil lamp. Sometimes he reads aloud from a manuscript, his voice steady, the words in Arabic or Mandinka rolling gently into the night. Other times he simply listens to the river, to the crickets, to the faint sound of the market, settling into sleep. One night, you catch him standing on the palace terrace, looking out over the darkened city. The minaret of the Jingerbur is a black silhouette against the starlit sky. I have seen the desert's edge, he says quietly, and the heart of Mecca, and the gold markets of Cairo. But this, he gestures toward the quiet streets and rooftops. This is where the journey ends and begins again. The empire still hums, the gold still glints, the caravans still cross the Sahara, but there is a sense now that the great arc of Musa's reign is curving toward its final stretch. The foundations are laid, the towers built, the stories already taking on the polish of legend. The rest will be for others to carry forward.